Welcome, everyone. My name is Claire Wathen. I'm with the Skoll Foundation, and it's such a pleasure on behalf of our team to welcome you to the Skoll World Forum. We are really thrilled to follow the opening plenary with this session, Is Anybody Here? Mobilizing Networks for Social Change. This year, the forum's theme is Closing the Distance, and we thought there was no better way to reflect that than work with our global and incredible network of change makers to build this kind of week of conversation. I have a couple things to cover very briefly before we get started. Feel free to use the chat as we go if you have any questions or comments, of course. This session is being recorded and we will release it publicly after the event. This will also help those in other time zones to also be able to join in the conversation. We have interpretation that is available for this session. And as you'll see, there's a button down at the bottom of your screen, looks like a globe with the word interpretation. Here is the information for you. We're thrilled to have this in multiple languages. Feel free to use the chat, as I've mentioned, to engage with each other and let the speakers know if you'd like them to expand on areas or bridge different topics, ask questions. Would love to have you involved as this session is for the next 60 minutes. We'll have a very quick poll that we'll post at the end of the session. Would love to get your feedback. And of course, join us on social media with the hashtag SkollWF. We're just so thrilled to have you here with us and include this session in this year's virtual Skoll World Forum, our second virtual Skoll World Forum somehow. And just a very big thank you to Movilizatorio for submitting this session, curating it, and bringing this conversation together. And so with that, I am thrilled to pass it over to Mariana with Movilizatorio to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Claire. Good morning to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mariana Diaz Kraus. I am partner and the Institutional and Partnerships Director at Mobilizatorio. Welcome to the panel, Is Anybody Here? Mobilizing Networks for Change. We have wonderful speakers today that is going to take us on a wonderful journey, starting with Carol Murders from Ford Foundation, then Graciela Solomon, also from Ford. Then we have Juliana Uribe, who is the CEO and founder of Mobilizatorio. Then we have Laura Serna, who is our champion of Escazu in Colombia and a local activist. And we have Lina Torres, also partner and project director at Mobilizatorio. So today we will take a journey into the world of civic mobilizations and the importance for social, the importance of this for social transformation and for democracy. Our speakers will pursue different perspectives of mobilizing networks for change. So we start with Ford, with the founder voice and an expert in storytelling for social change. Then we go over to Movilizatorio as the organization with a theory of change to mobilize and to achieve social transformation. And we end with Laura as a grassroots activist and citizen that mobilizes. And through these three voices, we will be answering the following questions. How to tell a story to mobilize for change around the world, how to create and mobilize networks for social change, and how to move forward from indignation to social change. At the end of the panel, we will open up for a dialogue with our panelists, and the idea is to gather the different ideas and comments that you have in the chat. So please do participate in the chat, give us comments, questions, inspirations, so that we can include them in the discussion. Once again, thank you so much for being here. So let's begin. Kara, welcome.
Mariana, thank you so much. What a great introduction, and hello to everybody. I see some old friends and new friends. It's great to be here, and I think we can say immediately that the answer to the question, is anybody here? The answer is yes. There's at least 50 people on the panel and another 200 people coming into the room. So we are here. I'm very happy to say that. And I'm pleased to represent Ford Foundation as the project director for Moving Image Strategies in the international program. So hello around the world. And I want to really thank the team at Mobilizatorio for including Ford. in this really important discussion. I'm greeting you myself from traditional Lenape lands in New Jersey, where the second pandemic spring has sprung. Thank you all for joining us this first day of Skoll's Virtual World Forum. It's really great to be back in this community, even virtually. Ford Foundation and Skoll Foundation both support the work of this fantastic organization. And for Ford, as a legacy social justice foundation, support of movements and community organizing has been a centerpiece of its strategy for decades. And this panel is so timely in part because of the rise in popular movements in the last few years. So I wanted to give you a kind of overview, a bird's eye view of that. And then we'll kind of hone in again, both to a regional and to local examples so that we can really get to the nitty gritty of making social change. So this rise in movements, popular movements, has been occurring with the backdrop of a backslide in democratic governance for the last 10 years and a global pandemic, as we've all talked about. Many of you will have seen the February 2020 annual Economist Intelligence Unit survey, which rates the states of democracy across 167 countries. And it finds in this survey, just 8.4% of the world's population lives in a full democracy, and more than a third live under authoritarian rule of some kind. And this is the lowest recorded democratic figure since the index began in 2006. Anthony Blinken, the new US Secretary of State, recently said that this is the time to establish democracy and not authoritarianism as the form of governance most capable of responding to the complex challenges facing a globally connected and interdependent planet. And yet authoritarianism is rising and the stakes are ever higher. And for us, this is an indicator of the crucial work that civil society has to undertake, often in the absence of relevant critique and demand for reform of government and corporate policy from political parties. So when we see this absent, civil society has to step up and is stepping up, we would argue. It's called on even more powerfully to be the voice for the rule of law, for economic inclusion, and for justice and dignity of all people. So often we think of popular movements as reactive, as defending human rights and seeking more inclusive economic policies. And we also see that movements in the last few years have targeted issues including corruption, inequality, gender-based violence, and increasing impacts of climate instability. But what if we reframed our thinking on this position and envisioned movements as leading and as successful over time? Would it change the way societies imagine progress toward greater justice and dignity? This is a central question, and we hope the examples that you will see in this panel give you some ways of thinking about the positive successes of movements. And as a way to frame the work that we will hear about and other popular movements, let's first remind ourselves just how much activity has taken place just in the last 4 years. So I went to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, and it has a global movements tracker. And it looks at the rise in popular movements since 2017. And just from their report, over 230 significant anti-government protests have erupted worldwide. This is quoting their website. More than 110 countries have experienced significant protests. 78% of authoritarian or authoritarian-leaning countries have faced significant protests. Over 25 significant protests have been directly related to the coronavirus pandemic. They continue in their analysis to relay that even if democracy has been retreating across the world for more than a decade now, the demand of different peoples to freely express their dignity and opposition to authoritarianism has not. I think that's important for us to remember. And one of the approaches, just speaking for Ford Foundation, that we believe is critical to include in any movement building strategy is the power of creative storytelling. And in Ford's case, we are experimenting with a variety of strategies to more deeply connect civically engaged storytellers with civil society leadership and specifically civic movements. We have a particular focus on all forms of moving image storytelling, but broadly speaking, it's an attempt to thread what is a cultural approach into issue-specific strategies for greater impact. And as our own president, Darren Walker, says, without artists, there can be no justice. So our strategies and approaches are a response to that. So for this panel, we've created a short reel just reminding us of the millions of voices that are being raised around the world. This is done by my colleague, Mia Deschamps, who's on this call. And then we'll hone in on some work in Latin America specifically, as relayed by my Ford Foundation colleague, Gracie Suleiman. And then we'll hear the in-depth case studies that Mariana talked about. So if we can cue up the 2-minute video now, and then following that, Gracie will take over for us, and we'll all be here at the end to continue the conversation. Thank you so much.
So I'll be sharing the video in 2 seconds. Perfect. So Gracie, if you could continue.
Thank you so much. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Graciela Selaiman. I'm a senior program officer at the Brazil office based in Rio de Janeiro. Wow, Cara, that was powerful and inspiring. As Cara mentioned, we started with this global view of what is going on and a bit of what Ford is supporting. And now I invite you to hone in a bit of what we have been doing in Latin America and particularly in Brazil, working with indigenous movements and peoples in the country. Before sharing my screen with you, I need to say that from where I speak, yes, authoritarianism is rising and the force is coming down. So that's why we decided to share with you a bit of our experience in working with the Brazilian indigenous movements and its initiatives to raise their voices and spread the word about the challenge that they are facing in Brazil. So I'm sharing with you my screen. Let's see if this works. Yeah. So I'd like to talk a bit about this specific campaign of the Association of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil, Indigenous Blood, Not a Single Drop More. This is a campaign that has reached Brazil and the world and is generating impactful conversations and outcomes, not only among social movements and activists and supporters of indigenous peoples themselves, but also with the mainstream media around the world. It is important to say that this is not only an effort led from Brazil or by the Brazilian office, but is a conjunct natural resources and climate change team based in the US and working with offices from around the world, and our own initiatives from the Brazil office to collaborate with global initiatives supported by Ford. So the Indigenous Peoples Campaign on Not a Single Drop More, it builds upon a broader campaign supported by Ford Foundation, which is the Guardians of the Forest, which has been presenting and showing the importance of indigenous peoples for the protection of the rainforest, and as one of the key players with the level of knowledge, expertise, and rooted experience in maintaining the forest up and alive. So we have been working with indigenous groups and leaders to strengthen them in their own advocacy effort, but also in the communications effort of the indigenous organizations and movements across the region. And together with that, we have been supporting organizations that work on strategic communications, content production, and use a wide variety of mediums and languages to show the aggravation of the violence against indigenous peoples, the dramatic numbers of deforestation that we are witnessing in Brazil, and the setbacks on indigenous rights that is also rising for the past couple of years. These efforts joins organizations with multiple capacity and talents, such as content production itself and campaigning, ability to work and be very strategic and smart with online media, working with film, arts, and investigative journalism, bringing the content developed with rigorous journalistic research and investigation in the country in dialogue with international media that has been reproducing the stories that Brazilian journalists have been developing. And together with that, a number of other approaches, such as supporting movements able to connect the traditional peoples with artists, supporting them in journeys across the globe. There was one very successful experience of indigenous peoples going to Europe to denounce and share their own voices about what's going on in the Brazilian forest and in the Brazilian political context, and connection with strategic leadership and new voices in events, in traveling, with a lot of effort on PR and also media liaison. Some of the groups that we have been supporting were able to put some of our key indigenous leaders, such as the one that you see, Sonia Guajajara, which is a powerful voice of APIB, in some of the main stages with huge visibility worldwide. So this was Sonia with the Alicia Keys in the Rock in Rio festival a couple of years ago. The work that we have been supporting with film producers, when they reach international audiences, they go hand in hand with the indigenous movement. So this one of the Oscars nominees in 2020, Petra Costa with The Edge of Democracy, went to the Oscar festival together with Sonia Guajajara to engage with international artists and raise the visibility and the costs of what's going on in the Brazilian Amazon. And together with that, we have been supporting the emerging voices out there in the field. So there is already an ecosystem of very powerful and strategic organizations working together in alliance and being led, I would say that is very, very important, by the indigenous groups themselves that are now generating new initiatives led by indigenous communicators. So I would say this is the next step of the work that we have been doing. This is the way forward to continue strengthening these populations and this work. So having shared these images and a bit of these strategies with you, some remarks based on my learning in the last 8 years supporting organizations and movements, both in Brazil and outside. The first one, looking from the perspective of the donor, and I think it's important for everyone working with social justice and long-lasting change to realize is that strategic networks are volatile. They are not permanent, and this is not bad. This is how it should be. We should be networking to mobilize network and not expecting networks to reflect the models and the structures that we are already used to and feel safe in working with. So it is important to let go of this idea of the network or this long-term network initiative to allow the emergence of what needs to emerge to respond to specific contexts, specific challenges in a hugely fast changing scenario and complex environment. The other important thing I would say is the need to diversify approaches and to diversify partners. It is an important lesson to learn to talk with those that we don't know so well, and even with those that we disagree with. But a network must have that, or else it is not fit for success. So being able to diversify, experiment, and bring multiple capacities and multiple perspectives and multiple points of view to a shared effort on a collective, collaborative goal is critical for the success of this kind of initiative. The other lesson we took from this experience and continue learning with it is how important it is to have local and global structures in permanent dialogue. Supporting the local organization is critical because this is what ensures that we go beyond denouncing and really promote long-lasting change, because this means changing the rules of the game and strengthening the organizations who are able to do that is critical, beyond raising their voices, but also counting on the media partners, the artists, the creators, and the international channels is equally critical. So a successful initiative in giving voice to movements on the ground is first, learn to be led by them, and second, connect them to the powerful narrative creators and media outlets outside in the world. And of course, with that, developing multiple capacities. Not only narratives are important, but the advocacy network can only be strengthened when we support local organizations to embed strategic communications in their own planning. So it is another task of donors to do so. I think someone is unmuted.
Yes, somebody's unmuted. Please, could you mute Maria Jose?
Yeah, okay, thank you. So without further ado, I don't want to take too much time.
Gracie, thank you so much.
Okay, I think I'm on my time. So yeah, just one last message. It takes time, and the change that we want to see deserve the time that they need to happen. So
definitely.
Thank you so much.
Gracie, thank you so much. Juli, take us away with Mobilizatorio.
Juli, you're muted.
No, thanks. Thanks so much for sharing, Graciela, with us. I have to say that we are proud partners of the Guardians of the Forest work. And that's one of the things in which we are so aligned with also the insights that you shared. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Juliana Uribe. I am the founder and CEO of Mobilizatorio. We are a citizen engagement lab based in Colombia, Mexico, and Argentina, and work in global campaigns such as the Guardians of the Forest that Graciela just shared. I'm going to do my best to summarize in 10 minutes a little bit of like the intense journey that it has been to work in mobilization and advocacy and citizen engagement in the past 4 years. We started Mobilizatorio as a citizen engagement and social innovation lab with the lenses to experiment how this movement building would work in Latin America and the developing world. We were very inspired by things that were happening in the US and in the UK, seeing all the technology being used for mobilizing, and we were so curious about the impact that this would have in Colombia and Latin America. So we started with one initial project that's called El Avispero. And El Avispero is a social movement and network of change makers. We started with that because we saw that so many people in Colombia were doing amazing work on social impact, especially young people, but we realized that they were not talking to each other. So this is where we are now. Our impact at the moment reaches over 100,000 people in our network that is connected through El Avispero platform. We have more than 1,700 organizations connected. We have mobilized over $1.5 million in donations, and we reach 6 million people on average by year with our campaigns on many different issues. We have launched since we started over 40 campaigns, and we're split in 9 leadership working groups with many, many leaders. Today, Laura will talk about the leadership that she has exercised in El Avispero Verde, which is our environmental and climate change group. We also have built and experimented with 3 different citizen engagement tech platforms, which have been like a very important experience in order like to see how technology can really work even in post-conflict and rural regions. And this is one message for everyone that I see people from Uganda, from Ghana, from East Asia connected, and makes me so excited because I think that one of the big messages that we want to share is that this also works in our countries. This also works in what in America they call the global South. And this really potentiates what we do in the offline mobilization, which is so important as well. And finally, one of our biggest achievements has been to influence in policy design and in citizen behavior. So you start seeing this, and I guess many of you are thinking, okay, how did you guys get there? How did you guys achieve this? So we chose some of the milestones that really, really took us to the moment where we are at. So we started in 2016. We were a very, very small team. We are 3 women co-founders and partners for Movilizatorio. So you can imagine the challenge of being women, working in technology, working in politics, and being a social entrepreneur at the same time. And we started by the beginning, which was with one campaign, one WhatsApp group of people, with a very, very basic citizen engagement platform where we were paying like $20 a month just to use it. So this is not impossible to do. We started with 0 followers in social media, and we started with the emails from friends and family that we really downloaded from Google, and we sent to everyone trying to promote peace building. This was our first moment. In 2017, we got support to do a bigger campaign. So we decided that we will try to change behavior in terms of aggressiveness. And we designed a group in which we tested people so that they will be conscious if they were aggressive or not. And then we will send tips to them to their email for them to change the behavior. And this is like, why were you guys doing this? Why were you guys talking about aggressiveness? 2017 was the year after the peace agreement was signed. It was so politicized in Colombia and so polarized around peace that we were experimenting with ways to reach people with a very different storytelling, similar to what Graciela was sharing. Basically trying to be fresh and be very, very creative in terms of tactics. So our community started growing with these new 15,000 people that joined. And then in 2018, we had elections, and we started to experiment by crowdfunding proposals from citizens, especially young citizens who were participating in our platforms. What we did is that we were able to bring proposals to the government, and we achieved for 5 articles of the Development National Plan to be changed or influenced by the ideas of all of these young people that joined us. Finally, in 2019 and 2020, we started working very hard with El Avispero Verde, who Laura will talk a little bit more about the climate change emergency and the signing of the Escazu agreement. And these were very big wins for us because we joined and worked with so many different groups in achieving this, that we basically achieved what we thought was our dreams: influencing public policy, uniting people, and achieving campaigns in which the public was involved in a very big way. So how did we do these big achievements? Because Bogota, in the same year and during the pandemic, Bogota declared the emergency, the climate change emergency, and the president of Colombia signed the Escazu agreement. So here are a few tips about how to do it that we want to share with you. First is key to identify your cause. In our case was threats to the environment and environmental leaders. Second, identify and partner with strategic allies. And this is key because the problems that we are challenging are so big that we can't do anything alone. So I guess one of the biggest work that we have to do is build networks and keep the networks alive. You know, everyone was talking in the chat room about the challenges of sustainability. We fully share that with you, and there are like high moments, lower moments, but we have to keep working and building those partnerships regardless of the moment of mobilization where we are. Third, we need to design a very strong theory of change before we jump into the tactics and the storytelling, because we need to have a very clear objective. We have to make our call to action and be very creative and sexy with our call to action. But we also need to measure if that is working. If not, we need to start adjusting. And finally, we need to be very active in carrying out our tactics, being constant, being creative, using great storytelling, and understanding which are the moments in which it's super key to activate our networks. Some of the lessons learned have been constantly nurture networks. That's so important. We cannot forget about nurturing the networks when we don't have a crisis. We have to continue networking, seeing each other, building trust, and planning for the future. We need to hear plurality of voices, people from the regions, people from different issues, people that think different from us and participate in different spaces. And third, we need to be very good at rapid response, because mobilizing is also so much about the moment, but it's being ready for when the moment comes. So being able to respond very rapidly, sometimes in hours, launching the campaign, launching the website, is very, very important. With this, I would love to invite you all to share in your social media and in the chat room what's your call and what's your cause at the moment, what are you guys working on, and what is your call to action. And also please share any questions that you have with us. I'm passing right now to Laura, which is one of the key members of the Escazu work that we did. She's a citizen and a mobilizer and an activist, and we are going to hear from her how the work looks like from the citizen perspective. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Juli.
Hola a todos.
Laura, just for Laura, you can use the interpretation tool if needed. Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, espero que me estén escuchando bien. Bueno, me presento, yo soy Laura Serna Mosquera, soy champion de Escazu por Colombia. ¿Y ese rol qué significa? Significa que los champions somos 5 jóvenes de Latinoamérica y del Caribe que estamos llamados a promover, a dar a conocer el acuerdo de Escazu. Básicamente lo que buscamos o nuestro rol es que como juventudes y como nueva generación, pues conozcamos no solamente la importancia de este acuerdo, sino que también nos movamos a que este acuerdo se vuelva una realidad en nuestros territorios. Partiendo de esta base, quiero contarles estas dos visiones y cómo se complementa Laura Serna como ciudadana y cómo se complementa Laura Serna como activista en temas ambientales. Entonces, Laura Serna como ciudadana. Yo soy abogada de formación y en ese sentido, como ciudadana, lo que busco es que en mis pequeñas acciones pueda haber un cambio en pro del medio ambiente y en pro de la defensa de los derechos humanos. Es supremamente importante tener en cuenta que nuestro impacto como ciudadanos muchas veces puede ser aún mayor que el impacto que podemos tener desde campañas o desde organizaciones que pueden ser demasiado grandes, pero que se quedan muchas veces en acciones demasiado grandes, pero que no se pueden continuar en nuestra cotidianidad de vida. Así que un ejemplo de lo que como ciudadana regular yo hago es conocer información sobre temas ambientales, saber qué proyectos se están haciendo en mi territorio, conocer cuáles son mis derechos como ciudadana y cuáles son mis deberes también como ciudadana. Y por otra parte, en la medida en la que yo voy obteniendo este tipo de información, yo puedo ir compartiéndola con otros y puedo ir haciendo un espacio de pedagogía en medio de mis roles como hija, como abogada, como estudiante, como amiga incluso, porque en medio de los debates que se van dando, nosotros vamos discutiendo sobre estos asuntos y esa es la manera en la que nosotros podemos ir involucrando esa conciencia social, esa responsabilidad social en la defensa en general de los derechos humanos y sobre todo en un contexto como el colombiano. Ahora, la parte relacionada como activista del acuerdo de Escazú ya va más en el enfoque de ir al territorio, de conocer las comunidades, de dar a conocer el acuerdo en su integridad y de sentarnos a discutir cuáles son esas cuestiones o cuáles son esas preguntas, esos interrogantes que se dan en torno al acuerdo. Porque muchas veces estamos acostumbrados a que el acuerdo o los acuerdos internacionales se lanzan al mercado, pero el ciudadano común no tiene esa interacción perfecta entre estos dos puntos. Y aquí es cuando yo quisiera compartirles y preguntarles cómo hacemos que el acuerdo de Escazú se vuelva una realidad no solamente en los países de manera general, sino que se vuelva una realidad desde lo más pequeño que nosotros conocemos. Y mis ejemplos van con la toma de decisiones que nosotros hacemos diarios. El acuerdo de Escazú, como seguramente ustedes lo conocen, busca promover espacios de participación ciudadana, información ambiental y defensa. Pero si yo como ciudadano no estoy informado desde las noticias, no voy a poder mucho menos participar. Y en ese mismo sentido, no voy a poder saber cuáles son esas decisiones en materia ambiental que mi territorio necesita. Así que esta unión entre ser abogada y ser una ciudadana común se materializa o se vuelve realidad en la medida en la que voy tomando de esto que aprendo en el activismo ambiental con lo que ya sé profesionalmente y trato de aterrizarlo a lo que somos diariamente, a las decisiones que diariamente tomamos. Colombia es un país con múltiples contextos y con una ciudadanía que requiere un proceso de información y de participación mucho más amplio para que en todas las problemáticas socioambientales a las que nos enfrentamos sean mucho más sencillas de llevar.
Muchísimas gracias, Laura. Thank you so much, Laura. Now, having heard the three voices, we go to our last part of our panel, and I will give it to Lina Torres just to open up a dialogue between our panelists and also include the different questions that you have been sharing in the chat and just go into a little deeper in the conversation. Lini.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much for all of your interventions and questions. I see that we are a panelist of activists. Everyone here has amazing causes I've been following. We have gender, we have environment, we have youth empowerment. So the questions also reflect a lot on what we are experiencing in the field every day as practitioners. So I would love to ask to the panel some of the questions. Unfortunately, we will not be able to ask them all, but I try to summarize a bit of what the spirit of the conversation. So one of the questions I'm seeing is a lot on the challenges and the barriers, particularly with the pandemic. Do you think, of the panelists, that we will face challenges in the next decade? And how can we sustain those social movements in order not to lose momentum? And I think this is a question that we are all facing. So I would love to open up with that question on how not to lose momentum with the social movements for the persons in the panel.
I don't know if I can take it and then I'll pass it to Graciela or Cara. But I think we shouldn't fear about losing momentum, because I think mobilization is impossible to have a permanent, sustained, high momentum. I think what we need to see is how we ride those different waves, moments in which we have like a big momentum and how we make the best out of that momentum, but also understands when we are like in the valleys, the important things that we need to do during the valley, like the strategy, like the fundraising, like the creating new alliances, like building trust with new partners. And also there are a lot of things sometimes happening behind the doors. So my fear will be actually to have a permanent momentum, because maybe we will even face burnout in a way. I think this is also a way in which we have to think about what is possible of doing as activists, what is viable of doing. And I think our biggest message today is that we need to understand that this is a long-term, this is like a marathon and not a career of speed. So we're running a marathon, and we need to understand when to run more fast and when to go slower, but to understand that the two different momentums are important.
Thank you, Juli. Anyone else in the panel wants to comment?
I would like to add, I totally agree with Juliana, couldn't agree more. And I think that one of the concerns that we need to keep in mind, or one of the goals we have to keep in mind, is not this idea of keeping the momentum. Sometimes keeps organizations and activists from looking what's coming next, because most of the time, and this is totally understandable, because of the challenges are continuous, and the complexity of the issues and the pace, the rhythm of change is so huge. It is hard not to spend all the energy just responding to what it is. But it's also very important to make a good use of time, especially when in the lower part of the cycle, to come together and try to see collectively what is emerging, what is coming next, and be prepared and be aware of that. If not, organizations and movements keep in the same loop again and again. And having a break from that is very, very important. Time is necessary for that to happen.
Thank you, Gracie. And also coming back to you, we are receiving questions. I see one from Nicaragua. And I think one of the situations we're facing is countries that are facing severe restrictions to the mobilization, to the activist threats in different countries. So people are curious about how can we activate or mobilize in those cases where there are high restrictions on civil society or harassment from government. And I think when you're talking about the Brazil context, it makes a lot of sense to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Dina. Yeah, that's why I say that not only holistic grant making is important, but also keeping the dialogue open with different perspectives is crucial. And of course, those that are at the forefront of political struggles, such as indigenous peoples in Brazil, they must also be connected to those organizations that are able to build alliance in support and defense of the civic space itself, of civil society itself, of the rule of law. So I see that more and more what the context that we are living in demand from us is that movements and organizations are able to break the silos, get out of the silos, get out of their bubbles and connect. Because the type of change that is necessary and the type of action that is demanded and the seriousness of the challenges that organizations are facing in some countries demand a lot of coordination, of trust, and shared strategizing. So I would say that working with those that apparently are in a different field is more important than ever today.
Thank you, Gracie. And I'm also seeing a lot of questions about the storytelling, because we talked a lot about how we make those voices heard throughout the world. So I would like to ask this to Kara on how to make a powerful distribution mix for the stories of change to reach the biggest impact.
Yeah, that's a great question from Amelia in Indonesia. I saw that on the chat as well. Thank you for that, Amelia. I think for us, at Ford, we're experimenting with widening the aperture, if you will, on how we consider the distribution channels and creative storytelling. Decades ago, it was really thought to be some sort of public television, public media infrastructure would be the most reliable distribution mechanism. And now we have so many technology platforms, the ubiquitousness of cell phone, much more than computer. And so we're really looking at ways to understand some of the social media transmission abilities or distribution platforms, and really think about how we support creative storytellers to work in these platforms, especially younger creative storytellers, thinking about how we can begin to utilize these channels. That's not to say that we're going to be funding a lot of TikTok influencers. On the other hand, we do want to understand how these social media channels are actually influencing people and creating momentum. And I just want to add to the last question about continuing momentum, and I want to point back to one of the tactics that Juliana talked about, and which I thought was so brilliant for them to do, because I think it's so very important that people who become civically engaged feel the sense of their own power, even if it's at a very immediate level. And the crowdfunding approach that you took for really micro ideas coming from the community and then crowdfunding them and linking them to conversation with government, you feel the impact and the connection immediately between your action and some element of awareness building or change. And I think those kinds of very creative strategies that we now have available because of platforms, technology platforms, are so important to kind of import into your movement building and your movement work, so that, again, you feel the change at a very visceral level, and that keeps you engaged and helps you expand your networks.
Thank you, Kara. And talking about platforms, Juli, there are some questions about the type of technology that Movilizatorio has been using on the campaigning. Can you expand on that a little bit?
Sure. So you'll be surprised that we haven't developed anything from scratch. Actually, we have been using many of the existing platforms, and we have been testing those platforms. We've been working with Nation Builder, that many of you should know. We've been working with Bonded, that is something that NOSAs are like a sister organization in Brazil developed. We have also used like a crowdfunding and crowdsourcing platform that we link to El Avispero that was used before for the city of Bogota. So we have experimented with that. We also use like Sendy to send emails or MailChimp. So to be honest, at the beginning, we thought that we'll need to invest so much money on technology, and we were scared that this will cost a lot and that we wouldn't be able like to pay for the team or for sustainability of the platforms after that. But we have the advantage of doing this after the US or the UK or so many other developed countries has done this for so many years, is that there are so many things that already exist that you can just repurpose and use for your organization. So that's like one of the things that has been working very well for us. And of course, we dream with better technology because we still have a lot of challenges when it comes to like working with so many different platforms. So we have the dream of our own technology, but it doesn't mean that you need it to actually move forward. So those are the challenges. And I was just texting, like, I would love to follow up on the conversation with any of you. I put my email on the chat. If anyone wants to continue a conversation, we will be like super happy to do it by email because we have so much to learn from each other.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Juli. And then I have a question for Laura, because she was talking from her personal experience doing mobilization. And there are a lot of questions on how to not only keep the momentum, because we already heard about that, but how to maintain those networks. How can we keep people engaged, and particularly individuals? How can we learn about this individual action? So Laura, can you tell us a bit more about how have you been working with the Escazu champions, and how this individual action keeps moving, and what have you learned from that experience?
Sadly, Laura had technological problems and is trying to reconnect.
Such is life.
Such is life, yes.
Anyone else in the panel want to discuss that question on the individual action and commitment?
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, but we believe like in what we call the commitment curve.
She's back.
Did she hear the question?
I don't think so. Okay. She just got in.
I'll just continue quickly and then switch to Laura maybe for another question, Lini. But I think that's one of the biggest questions, and I think that's we need to be very creative and experiment a lot, because there are different tactics that work in different moments. And I think that we need to understand that some people like us are super, super engaged and really participate in a lot of things, or do this for a living. So we have so much more time and more energy and more knowledge to participate. But there are other people that still want to engage. So for us, we try to engage from likes to sharing content, to sharing ideas, to giving away some of their time as volunteers, or asking them to donate a little bit to the cause, or signing a petition. So what I think it's important is to find different ways to experiment, and what is in the heart of all of that, and I think is also one of our key learnings, is to build your database. Build your database, have your mailing list, build a very big mailing list, and use that mailing list to contact people for different actions in different moments. And you can do the same thing that we did. We started by downloading the emails that we already have from our friends and family, start emailing those people, start asking those people to do something about it, and campaign by campaign, you start to see how that list grows and grows and grows. And the bigger your list is, the bigger people you're reaching directly without having to pay influencers or Facebook ads, and the more chances you have to actually engage them in the different actions that you are organizing.
Thank you, Juli. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but this has been an amazing conversation. I think we have many takeaways. And I think that what we're seeing is a bunch of challenges as usual, but what would be the life of a mobilizer if it wasn't for those challenges? That's the reason why we wake up every day and we try to keep on working on those barriers. So thank you so much for being here. I have a couple of messages that I heard from the panel. Of course, this is not everything, but it really struck me, the message, and like, we can't really wait for an emergency to happen to work on the social tissue and on the agreements and on the networking that needs to be happening before responding to big and large challenges. So nurturing those networks, empowering and building capacity is a big takeaway of this panel. We see this as a long-term work, as Juliana was describing it. It's not always as intense, but it has to keep happening no matter what, at different levels of intensity, but we can't give up on building the seed of those large movements that will respond to the challenges that we're facing as societies. And in order to do that, we really need to empower people to tell their own story. What we saw with Graciela's example, the Guardians of the Forest work, and how Indigenous peoples are being able to use their own communication channels, tell their own stories. They don't need to wait for someone to come and tell exactly what they are living. And that is also very critical when we are facing problems such as with what we're doing with the pandemic, the lack of mobility, international travel, so that this hyper-local movement allows them to reach out to the world through technology is also a key part of this story. And that also means that diversifying the partners and approaches. I really take that from your intervention, because it means having a lot of resources. And what we're seeing is a bunch of challenges, and creativity needs to be emerging all the time. Creativity means engaging different voices, engaging different media, different strategies, so that we keep on trying. And what we see in the life of mobilization and citizen engagement is that we keep trying. Sometimes things work, sometimes things don't work. That's why in Movilizatorio we decided to found ourselves as a laboratory, because we never keep we never end experimenting, and we keep on facing new challenges. We saw the comments from people from Nicaragua, and what we're seeing in Brazil. The challenges keep arising, so the creativity needs to be on. And luckily, we have a ton of voices and perspective that will feed on that creativity. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending this panel, and we really hope to continue the conversation. So we want to invite you to the Welcome Meetup space, which will be happening exactly after this session. It will be a casual networking space, and we can keep talking about that, and hopefully expanding on how can we nurture this creativity and these networks to keep facing the challenges ahead. Thank you so much for attending.
Thank you so much, everyone, for a great participation. Thank you to all the panelists and to Skoll for giving us this wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, thank you for the foundation. Thank you, Skoll, for joining us, for giving us this space, and hopefully we keep in touch